He didn't want to destroy the world. He wanted to impress it. That's what makes Kaiser Wilhelm II so terrifying. Not rage, not ideology, not a manifesto soaked in hatred. Just a broken, desperate man, sitting on the most powerful throne in Europe, with something to prove and no one strong enough to stop him. We know Hitler. The world has dissected him for 80 years. His evil feels enormous, deliberate, surgical. He built the machinery of genocide with cold, bureaucratic precision. He wrote the plan. He signed the orders. He watched the smoke rise. But here's the question nobody asks. What if the more dangerous man wasn't the one who knew exactly what he was doing? What if the most catastrophic leader in modern history was the one who had no idea? Kaiser Wilhelm II inherited something extraordinary. The German Empire in 1888 was the envy of every nation. Industrial, disciplined, diplomatically formidable. Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor, had spent decades constructing a delicate web of alliances. A system so carefully balanced it had kept Europe from tearing itself apart for nearly 20 years. It was a masterpiece of statecraft. Wilhelm fired him within 2 years. 30 months. That's all it took. 30 months for Wilhelm to dismantle what Bismarck had built, sever the treaties that kept Russia neutral, and announce to Europe, loudly, publicly, arrogantly, that Germany wanted more. More colonies. More naval power. More respect. He got a world war instead. Think about what Hitler inherited. A nation humiliated. A military shackled by Versailles. A democratic government collapsing under economic catastrophe. He climbed from nothing. He built his power deliberately, ruthlessly, from the rubble up. The conditions that made Hitler possible, the shame, the fury, the desperate nationalism, those conditions had a creator. That creator wore a crown. Wilhelm didn't build the war. He built the world that made the war inevitable. He didn't light the fire. He spent 30 years soaking everything in gasoline. And the most unsettling part? He genuinely believed he was the victim. Right up until the end, exiled in a Dutch manor house, watching the world burn for the second time in his lifetime, Wilhelm II believed history had wronged him. He read newspapers. He wrote letters. When France fell to Hitler in 1940, Wilhelm sent a telegram of congratulations. He saw a German victory and thought, "Finally, my generals are being appreciated." He never understood what he had done. Hitler understood exactly what he was doing. That's a critical distinction. Hitler's evil was intentional, directed, ideological. He looked at a map and saw a vision. He looked at a people and saw a weapon. History will never forget that. But intentionality, it turns out, is not the only measure of destruction. The First World War killed 17 million people. It erased 4 empires. It redrew every border in Europe. It created the conditions, the humiliation, the desperation, the fractured identity that made Adolf Hitler not just possible but inevitable. Without Wilhelm's failures, there is no Versailles. Without Versailles, there is no Hitler. Without Hitler, there is no Holocaust, no Second World War, no 50 million dead. The chain begins with one man. A man who was never supposed to fail. A man who had every advantage, every alliance, every structural gift a leader could ask for. A man who destroyed it all, not with malice, but with ego, insecurity, and catastrophic, reckless incompetence. That is the argument. And once you see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. Who was Kaiser Wilhelm II? And how does one man, without even meaning to, start the century that killed over 100 million people? Here is the mystery historians never fully resolve. Wilhelm II was not stupid. Read the accounts. Speak to the scholars. Every serious biographer agrees. The man was intellectually sharp, curious, genuinely fascinated by science, archaeology, naval engineering. He could hold court on subjects ranging from ancient Assyria to modern shipbuilding. He spoke multiple languages. He corresponded with kings, scholars, industrialists. So why did everything he touched turn to catastrophe? That question has haunted historians for over a century. And the answer, when it finally surfaces, is darker than simple incompetence. Wilhelm was brilliant in bursts. catastrophic in systems. He could impress in a room. He could not govern an empire. The difference between those two things, between performance and leadership, is exactly where empires go to die. But here's what makes it stranger. The people around him knew. His own mother, Victoria, eldest daughter of Queen Victoria of England, wrote private letters describing her son as dangerously unstable. His tutors noted the volatility. His advisors learned quickly. Challenge him directly and you lose access. Agree with him and watch the decisions get worse. The court of Kaiser Wilhelm II was not a place of power. It was a theater of managed ego. Everyone performing stability around a man who had none. Bismarck saw it immediately. When Wilhelm dismissed him in 1890, Bismarck didn't just lose a job. He issued a warning. He told confidants that Wilhelm intended to be his own chancellor, that he wanted personal rule, direct, unmediated, answerable to no one, and that this would end in disaster. Nobody published it. Nobody acted. Europe watched a 29-year-old with a withered arm and an oceanic need for validation take control of the most powerful military state on the continent, and said nothing loud enough to matter. Now here is where it gets psychologically disturbing. Wilhelm's instability had a source. Historians point to the birth trauma, a complicated delivery that permanently damaged his left arm. A childhood shaped by a mother who was cold, demanding, and emotionally remote. A father who died before Wilhelm could ever earn his approval. A grandmother, Queen Victoria herself, whose shadow he could never escape. He spent his entire reign trying to prove something. To a mother who didn't believe in him. To a grandmother who never feared him. To a Europe that refused to take him seriously. And he had the most powerful army in the world to make his point. Bismarck had a system. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't loud. It didn't look like dominance from the outside. But it worked. For nearly 2 decades, Bismarck kept Germany at the center of European diplomacy by making every major power feel like Germany was their friend. Russia felt secure. Austria felt supported. France felt contained, but not cornered. Britain felt unthreatened. It was a lie, of course. A brilliant, necessary lie. Bismarck understood something fundamental about power. You don't have to be the strongest nation in the room. You have to be the most indispensable one. Germany under Bismarck was the hinge on which European stability swung. Remove the hinge, and every door in the continent flies open. Wilhelm removed the hinge. His first major strategic decision was to allow the reinsurance treaty with Russia to lapse in 1890. This was not a minor bureaucratic oversight. This was the single wire holding the entire Eastern Alliance structure together. Bismarck had negotiated it carefully. It kept Russia neutral. It prevented the nightmare scenario every German strategist feared, a two-front war, East and West simultaneously. Wilhelm let it expire because he found it complicated. Russia, feeling abandoned, immediately began moving toward France. Within 2 years, the Franco-Russian alliance was signed. The very encirclement Bismarck had spent his career preventing, Germany surrounded by hostile powers, had begun to materialize. And it had taken Wilhelm less than 24 months to make it happen. But Wilhelm didn't see danger. He saw opportunity. He launched Weltpolitik, world policy, a grand, sweeping vision of German global dominance. Colonies in Africa, naval expansion to rival Britain, a seat at every table, in every room, on every continent. It was the foreign policy equivalent of a man walking into a crowded room and overturning every table, then wondering why everyone is staring. Britain had been carefully neutral under Bismarck's architecture. Wilhelm's naval buildup changed that overnight. Admiral Tirpitz began constructing a high seas fleet, not large enough to defeat the Royal Navy, but precisely large enough to terrify it. Britain, which had maintained what it called splendid isolation, suddenly felt the cold draft of threat. And threatened nations do not stay isolated. They find friends. Britain found France. Then Russia. The Triple Entente, Britain, France, Russia, was not a natural alliance. These were nations with centuries of rivalry and suspicion between them. They came together for one reason, one accelerant, one man who had made each of them feel, simultaneously, that Germany could not be trusted. And still, Wilhelm believed he was being misunderstood. His diplomatic style made it worse. He gave interviews that scandalized foreign governments. In the infamous 1908 Daily Telegraph affair, he told a British newspaper that the German people were hostile to Britain, but that he personally was not, and that he had helped Britain plan its strategy during the Boer War. The British public was outraged. The German public was humiliated. His own Reichstag demanded accountability. Wilhelm was shocked by the reaction. He had meant it as a gesture of friendship. That is the strategic portrait of Kaiser Wilhelm II. Not a villain plotting in darkness. Something far more dangerous. A man of enormous power and fractured judgment, operating without restraint, surrounded by advisors too afraid to tell him the truth, making decision after decision that each individually seemed survivable, but collectively constructed a trap that all of Europe would fall into. Hitler had a strategy. It was monstrous, but it was coherent. Wilhelm had chaos dressed in imperial uniform. And chaos, history teaches us, kills more efficiently than any plan. June 28, 1914. Sarajevo. A street corner. A wrong turn. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, is shot twice at close range by a 19-year-old Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip. The Archduke dies within the hour. His wife Sophie dies beside him. The world has its trigger, but a trigger without a loaded gun does nothing. Here is what the history books summarize in a paragraph, but what deserves an hour of silence to absorb. In the days immediately following the assassination, Europe had a choice. A real, documented, historically verified choice. The crisis could have been contained. Diplomats knew it. Several generals knew it. Even some members of Wilhelm's own court knew it. Wilhelm made sure it wasn't. Austria-Hungary was furious but hesitant. They wanted to punish Serbia, but they feared Russia would intervene to protect its Slavic ally. So they came to Berlin. They asked Wilhelm directly, "If we move against Serbia, will Germany support us?" Wilhelm said yes. Immediately. Unconditionally. Historians call it the blank check. Germany handed Austria-Hungary unlimited backing, military, diplomatic, strategic, to do whatever it chose. No conditions. No limitations. No requirement to pursue diplomacy first. It was the single most catastrophic diplomatic decision of the 20th century. Austria-Hungary, emboldened, issued Serbia an ultimatum so deliberately humiliating it was designed to be rejected. Serbia actually accepted most of it, nearly every demand. But Austria-Hungary declared war anyway. Russia began to mobilize in defense of Serbia. Germany, locked into its own military timetable, the Schlieffen Plan, began mobilizing in response. The machine started moving. And here is the moment that separates Wilhelm from Hitler in the most chilling way imaginable. When Wilhelm finally grasped what was happening, when he saw the full cascade of mobilizations beginning across Europe, he panicked. He called his generals. He asked them to stop, to redirect, to move the armies east only, avoiding France, buying time for diplomacy. His generals told him it was impossible. The trains were already running. Hitler never lost control of his war. He built it, directed it, owned it completely. Wilhelm's war swallowed him whole within days of starting. He had handed the match to Austria-Hungary. He had soaked the continent in fuel for 26 years. And when everything finally ignited, he stood there, genuinely stunned, watching the flames. The most powerful man in Europe. Helpless. Ask yourself one question. What is more terrifying, a monster who knows he is a monster, or a man who causes monstrous destruction and never once believes he did anything wrong? That is the psychological core of Kaiser Wilhelm II. Hitler carried the weight of intentionality. Every order signed, every policy enacted, every life extinguished was a deliberate choice made by a man who wanted exactly that outcome. History can point to Hitler and say, he knew, he planned, he chose. That clarity, as horrifying as it is, gives us something to hold on to. A defined evil. A traceable line between thought and consequence. Wilhelm gives us nothing so clean. His psychological profile reads like a case study in what happens when profound insecurity is handed absolute power. The withered arm. The cold mother. The dead father. the towering grandmother whose empire made his look provincial. Every interaction Wilhelm had with the world was filtered through one obsessive question: am I enough? He never believed he was. And so he performed. Constantly. Exhaustingly. The military uniforms, he owned hundreds, changed multiple times daily. The speeches dripping with imperial grandeur. The naval fleet built not for strategic necessity but for psychological validation. Every battleship a message. Every colony a scream. Look at me. Fear me. Respect me. But here is the darkest psychological dimension. The people closest to Wilhelm adapted to his instability rather than correcting it. His advisors learned to present information in ways that wouldn't trigger his volatility. His generals worked around him rather than with him. His court became an echo chamber, not by conspiracy, but by survival instinct. Nobody wanted to be the one who told the Kaiser he was wrong. So nobody did. This is how catastrophe operates at the highest levels of power. Not through evil masterminds. Through ordinary people making small, daily decisions to avoid confrontation. Every courtier who softened a report. Every general who withheld a warning. Every diplomat who smiled and nodded. Each one added another stone to the avalanche. Wilhelm didn't break the world alone. He broke it with the silent cooperation of everyone too afraid to speak. And when the war ended, 4 years, 17 million dead, for empires erased, Wilhelm boarded a train to the Netherlands. He lived another 23 years. He gardened. He chopped wood. He wrote letters blaming everyone else. He died without ever saying sorry. To understand the full weight of Wilhelm's responsibility, you have to zoom out. Not just to 1914. Not just to the July crisis. You have to go back further, to every decision, every dismissal, every diplomatic grenade he casually threw into rooms he didn't understand, and trace the architecture of destruction he built, brick by brick, across 26 years of personal rule. Because this is what separates his culpability from Hitler's in the most profound way. Hitler operated in a compressed timeline. 12 years from chancellorship to defeat. Monstrous, concentrated, deliberate. A hurricane that formed fast and destroyed faster. Wilhelm operated across decades. His damage was slow, structural, like water finding cracks in stone, patient, invisible, catastrophic only when the wall finally collapses. By the time Europe felt the full weight of what Wilhelm had built, it was already too late to escape it. Consider the naval race. When Wilhelm launched his fleet expansion program in the late 1890s, Britain did not immediately declare hostility. It watched. It calculated. It sent diplomats to Berlin hoping for reassurance. Wilhelm gave them speeches instead. Grand, aggressive, unmistakably threatening speeches about Germany's place in the sun. Britain's response was the Dreadnought program, an acceleration of warship production so dramatic it rendered every existing navy in the world obsolete overnight. The arms race had begun. And arms races do not end in diplomacy. They end in either bankruptcy or war. Europe was not going bankrupt. Consider the Moroccan crises. In 1905 and again in 1911, Wilhelm directly challenged French influence in Morocco. Not because Germany had genuine strategic interests there. Not because Morocco mattered to German trade or security. But because Wilhelm wanted to test the Anglo-French Entente, to drive a wedge between Britain and France by forcing a confrontation they weren't ready for. It failed. Both times. Worse than failing, it strengthened the very alliance he was trying to fracture. Every time Wilhelm pushed, Britain and France moved closer together. Every manufactured crisis produced more trust between Germany's enemies and more isolation for Germany itself. His advisors told him this was happening. He interpreted their concern as timidity. Now consider the Schlieffen Plan, the military strategy that made European war not just possible but automatic once mobilization began. The plan required Germany, in the event of a two-front war, to knock France out first with a lightning strike through neutral Belgium, then redirect east to fight Russia. It was a mechanical solution to a diplomatic failure, a war plan built on the assumption that Germany would eventually have enemies on both sides simultaneously. That assumption existed because Wilhelm had spent years creating those enemies. The plan removed human decision-making from the equation at the most critical moment. Once the order to mobilize was given, The trains ran on a fixed schedule. Divisions moved to predetermined positions. There was no pause button, no diplomatic override. The entire military machine operated on the assumption that speed mattered more than judgment. Wilhelm built the machine, then lost control of it in 72 hours. Hitler never lost control of his military apparatus. He dominated it, purged it, bent it entirely to his personal will. His generals feared him. His orders were followed with terrifying precision. The Holocaust did not happen by accident or bureaucratic momentum. It happened because Hitler directed it with sustained, deliberate intention. Wilhelm's war happened partly because nobody could stop the machine he built from running. That distinction, intention versus system, is where the historical argument becomes genuinely unsettling. We judge Hitler by his intentions because they were so clearly, documentably evil. We should judge Wilhelm by his systems, because the systems he built, dismantled, and left ungoverned killed just as efficiently as any ideology. And then consider the longest shadow Wilhelm cast. The war he enabled produced Versailles. Versailles produced humiliation. Humiliation produced hyperinflation, depression, desperation, and the psychological conditions for radical nationalism to take root in German soil. Every historian who has seriously studied the rise of National Socialism traces the roots back through the Weimar Republic's fragility, back through Versailles, back through the war, back through the July crisis, back through the blank check, back to Wilhelm. Hitler needed a broken Germany to rise. Wilhelm broke it. Hitler needed a humiliated people hungry for restoration. Wilhelm created them. Hitler needed enemies to blame. Wilhelm had spent decades teaching Germans that the world was conspiring against them, that England envied them, that France feared them, that Germany deserved more than it was being given. He planted the seed. Hitler simply harvested it. One man built the conditions. Another man weaponized them. History remembers the weaponizer. But the builder, the architect of collapse, walked away to his garden in the Netherlands, picked up an axe, and spent his exile chopping wood. 23 years. Thousands of logs. Not one moment of reckoning. By 1918, the empire was bleeding out. 4 years of industrial slaughter had consumed an entire generation of German men. The Western Front, that obscene stretch of mud and wire running from Belgium to Switzerland, had swallowed hundreds of thousands of lives and moved, in total, less than 10 miles. The home front was starving. The British naval blockade had choked German supply lines so effectively that civilians were rationing turnips to survive the winter. And Wilhelm was reviewing parades. His generals had quietly, systematically removed him from every meaningful decision of the war by 1916. Hindenburg and Ludendorff ran the military. The Chancellor ran domestic policy. Wilhelm attended ceremonies. He pinned medals on chests. He gave speeches to soldiers who were already dying in trenches he would never visit. The man who had demanded personal rule, who had fired Bismarck to ensure no one would ever govern above him, had become decorative. A shadow Kaiser. His own court's phrase. Not whispered. Eventually spoken openly. Then came August 1918. The 100 Days Offensive. Allied forces broke through German lines with devastating coordination. Ludendorff, the general who had propped up the entire war effort through sheer iron will, suffered what his own staff described as a psychological breakdown. He told Wilhelm the war was lost. That Germany needed an armistice. Immediately, Wilhelm received the news calmly. That calmness is perhaps the most damning detail in his entire biography. 17 million people dead. 4 years of civilizational catastrophe. And the man most responsible for starting it received the news of its ending with the composure of someone hearing about a cancelled dinner reservation. The abdication came in November 1918. Wilhelm didn't announce it himself. His chancellor released the statement while Wilhelm was still arguing about the terms. He boarded a train to the Netherlands before the abdication was even formally processed, slipping across the border in the night, leaving behind an empire in revolution, a people in chaos, and a peace settlement that would punish every German who remained. He took his monogrammed luggage. He left everything else. The Allies demanded his extradition for war crimes. The Netherlands refused. Wilhelm settled into Doorn House, a comfortable manor with extensive grounds, and began his new life. He planted roses. He studied archaeology. He entertained guests. The war he started was over. He was fine. Here is what nobody tells you. Hitler blamed Wilhelm too. Not privately. Not in hushed conversations behind closed doors. Openly. Deliberately. Adolf Hitler, the man history has designated as the singular embodiment of modern evil, looked at Kaiser Wilhelm II and saw the person responsible for Germany's greatest humiliation. He despised him. He refused to restore the monarchy. He ignored Wilhelm's wife's petitions. He crushed monarchist gatherings with the same brutality he applied to communist meetings. Two men, both responsible for catastrophic German wars, and one of them spent his final years blaming the other. The irony is almost unbearable. But here is the twist that cuts deepest. Wilhelm lived to see Hitler's early victories. He watched from his Dutch manor as German forces swept through Poland, through France, through the Low Countries with terrifying speed. And his response, documented, verified, historically preserved, was not horror. It was pride. He sent congratulatory telegrams. He praised the generals. He called the victories miraculous. He saw a resurgent Germany and felt vindicated, as though Hitler's war was somehow completing something Wilhelm had started. As though the humiliation of Versailles being reversed was his redemption. He never once connected the dots. He never understood that the army doing the conquering had been built on the grave of his empire. That the rage fueling those soldiers had been lit by the defeat he caused. That every tank rolling through France in 1940 was, in a direct and traceable line, a consequence of the blank check he signed in 1914. He watched his legacy conquer Europe and thought it was someone else's story. Wilhelm II died on June 4, 1941. Quietly, in his bed, at 82 years old, surrounded by the modest comfort of exile. Hitler wanted to bring his body back to Berlin, not out of respect, but for propaganda, to present himself as heir to imperial greatness. Wilhelm had left instructions. No return unless the monarchy was restored. Even in death, he didn't understand the world he lived in. So here is the final question. The one that doesn't resolve. The one that should keep you awake. We built museums for Hitler's evil. We built tribunals. We built an entire moral architecture around ensuring the world never forgot intentional monstrosity. But what do we build for the man whose catastrophic incompetence killed just as many? What is the word for a disaster that nobody meant to cause, but everybody saw coming? History is still deciding, and the century Wilhelm accidentally ignited is still, in ways we haven't fully mapped, burning.